morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of Voice of Radio. So today, we are continuing our look at the complete history of the Pokemon trading card game, and we have gotten all the way to Platinum, and quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, Platinum was a big one. Do make sure you spam that like button to let me know you want this series to continue. Now, Platinum was released in Japan on the 10th of October 2008, made its way out in English on February the 11th, 2009. And what was cool about this set was it really was Platinum. It had moved on from the Diamond and Pearl block to the Platinum block. Now, obviously, we're still talking Gen 4, but there was a noticeable shift into the Platinum era. And what was really cool was that the card designers really took advantage of the move, and they introduced a lot in this set. And one thing which I adored in Platinum, they made basic decks better, and they made evolution decks better, which I really appreciated. Now, one thing that was really cool here was that we finally saw our introduction of Shaymin, one of the many Pokemon that was essentially delayed to coincide with a film. We got a lovely Holo Land form. We got a lovely Holo Sky form. We got a lovely non-Holo Land form. And then we got a level X of Land form. And we got ourselves a level X of Sky form. Yeah, we got lots of Shaymin in this particular set. And the funny thing is, when I've made my list of the best cards in the set, the Shaymin haven't made their way onto there, even though both the Shaymin Level X were really good. The Land form, or Landmin as we often refer to him, is a Pokemon that gives each of your grass Pokemon an extra 40 HP, but doesn't stack. And then has an attack letting you choose as many grass energy from your hand as you like and attach them to your Pokemon in any way you like, and actually does more damage for each one you attached. As for Skymin, or Skyform Shaymin, you had the Pokebody Revenge Seed that said if any of your grass Pokemon were KO'd by damage from an opponent's attack during your opponent's last turn, each of Shaymin's attacks do an extra 60 damage. So you based it 110 damage and moved your energy wherever you liked. The Shaymin were actually quite good. They were quite niche. They haven't made my best cards in the set list. And I'm going to tell you now right off the bat, there are probably some cards you really liked from Platinum that aren't on my list of best cards from the set. That is how good this set was. Now, the other cool thing here was that it introduced the origin form of Giratina. Now, to be fair, we've already had Giratina, but here we had both forms of Giratina coming through with Holos, and then we saw both forms of Giratina coming through with non-Holos, and then we had the origin form only getting ourselves a level X, which was really kind of cool. They went all in on Shaymin and Giratina in this particular set. But far more interesting in terms of the competitive scene, and something that would really properly shake the game up right until the moment they were all rotated, this introduced SP Pokemon. Now, in Platinum, these were all Team Galactic's Pokemon, like, Crobat G, as a nice little example. And they had pictures of Team Galactic on them, which were quite lovely and all of that. But what was really cool was that they were all basic Pokemon. So Crobat should have been a Stage 2, but it comes through here as a basic. That was the hook. Although they did get their own tricks. We'll get more into them in a minute. But for instance, Poketurn, very nice card, lets you pick up one of your SP Pokemon. Well, that's Super Scoop Up. But it's not Super Scoop Up. But because Super Scoop Up, you need to flip a heads in order to make it work, this just worked. It was quite ridiculous. I mean, you want one more example? I've told you about BB Search and how cool that was. SP Radar was basically an item version of BB Search for SP Pokemon. But it wasn't your supporter for the turn. Make no mistake about it, these SP Pokemon were beloved by competitive players because they were really competitive. The best attackers wouldn't come until the next couple of sets. with the exception of probably Dialga, who was phenomenal. But make no mistake about it, SP really changed the game. The other thing that was really interesting here was that this set saw the introduction of the Lost Zone, a brand new mechanic for the game. Now, the Lost Zone is basically like for those newer players, it's basically like a second discard pile, but one from which you cannot recover your cards. So, the non-holo Giratina had Broken Space Blow that said if the defending Pokemon was knocked out by this attack, you put the Pokemon and all cards attached to it into the Lost Zone rather than the discard pile, so they couldn't be recovered. Dialga G level X, when you attacked, you flipped a coin until you got tails. For each heads, you removed an energy from the defending Pokemon and put it in the Lost Zone, so they couldn't get it back. Giratina level X, again had an attack that if you KO with an attack, you put the Pokemon in the Lost Zone rather than being discarded. And Palkia G level X, once during your turn, any player who had 4 or more bench Pokemon chooses 3 of them to save, and the others all go into the Lost Zone, not the discard pile. It was quite a quiet start for the Lost Zone. It would be expanded more in future sets, as we will see in future weeks, but it was really cool to get this new mechanic coming in. Now, once again, like we saw in the previous set, we did have a bunch of secret rares here. Starting off, we basically had updated reprints of old cards. What was really cool here was they gave us Electabuzz, Hitmonchan, and Scyther, which of course were the 3 main Pokemon in the Haymaker deck, which was the very first ever broken Pokemon deck. I have done a video about that. It is one of the, might be the most, otherwise it's one of the most popular videos on this channel, so do go check that out if you haven't done so already. We also got shiny Pokemon coming around again. We got ourselves a Lotad, a Swablu, and a Vulpix. And the Vulpix, to be fair, was actually a really good card. For 0 energy, you got to search for up to 2 fire energy, show them to your opponent and put them into your hand. It did see a whole bunch of play. The other thing, of course, really interesting is that all 3 of these Pokemon have 3 moves, or 2 moves and an ability, and it is extremely rare. Usually you get 2 moves or 1 move and an ability at the most. There are exceptions. The fact that all 3 of these fit into the exceptions is really kind of cool. Now, according to the lovely folks over at Bulbapedia, a very nice website which is really good for doing the old research, the pre-release promo here was Lucario. And we also did get ourselves a bunch of pre-release sleeves when you turned up to a pre-release. And for Platinum, you got yourself Giratina sleeves. Well, it had to be Giratina or Shaymin. It just happened to be Giratina. Cool. Now, in terms of the most expensive cards, generally the secret rares will run you about $70. Vulpix tends to be the most sought after of them. And the level X's will generally run you about $30, and either of the Shaymin will probably be the most popular. But like I've said, these Diamond and Pearl era sets, they sold really well. They were in a fairly boom period for the game, and none of these cards have ended up being super rare or expensive as time's gone by. We do usually take a look at the level X's in each set, and we might as well do so now because this had a good lot of level X's. Dialga G came along and was absolutely full-on, over-the-top, proper job, phenomenal, as we'll see in a moment. We got Drapion level X that let you flip a coin to poison but put 3 damage counters on between turns, which was kind of fun. Giratina level X, we've already seen introduce the Lost Zone, but it also, when your opponent's Pokemon tried to attack, they had to discard a card from their hand, and if they couldn't, gutted. And Palkia G level X, another really good one we'll get to in a moment. And then we got both the land and sky versions of Shaymin that we've already had a little bit of a chat about. Now, in terms of the theme decks here, I'm assuming at this stage, given everything I've told you about the set so far, I don't need to really tell you which Pokemon are being featured. We've got a Giratina theme deck, and we've got a Shaymin theme deck. Now, the Giratina theme deck obviously gave us a holo Giratina, which was exclusive to this deck. It was a non-holo in the set proper. We then got ourselves a non-holo Dugtrio, and a non-holo Gardevoir, which was exclusive because Gardevoir was only a holo in the set. Although in a weird and strange thing, this Gardevoir was actually not great. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't like a game-breakingly great Gardevoir, as most of them tend to be. Flourish was the Shaymin theme deck. This got you a holo Shaymin, which is exclusive to the deck. It was a non-holo in the set proper. And then you got yourself non-holo rares of Ninetales and Beautifly, neither of which, unfortunately, were exclusive to the deck. They were just, non-holo in the set normally. One thing that was kind of cool, both of these decks had Shaymin coins, so gutted Giratina. Shaymin is the most loved. Now, as we move on to look at the best cards, there may be some I don't mention that you'd wished I had, and I'm sorry if that's the case. This set was nuts. But I think most nuts amongst all of the nuts cards here was Broken Time Space. Broken Time Space is the kind of card that you could legitimately call broken, and I don't think anybody would accuse you of clickbaiting. And that is a rare thing in the Pokemon community. Now, Broken Time Space was a stadium card that just let you evolve whenever you felt like it. Either player could evolve any of their Pokemon whenever they liked. And essentially, pretty much every evolution deck used this. Things were complicated by the fact that Rare Candy would actually allow you to evolve from a basic to a stage 2 the turn you played the basic. So you would occasionally see decks that weren't playing Broken Time Space purely based on the fact that they actually did still have Rare Candy being so much better than it is nowadays. And it's worth noting Rare Candy back then also allowed you to evolve into a stage 1. But of course you could do it the turn you played the stage 1, which is why that was relevant. But Broken Time Space, any of the evolution Pokemon we've talked about in recent weeks, like Gyarados, like Machamp for instance, absolutely relied on this card, and all the evolution decks we're going to talk about moving forward, pretty much all of them anyway, relied on this card. I quite literally cannot overstate how good and well played and important this card was. It was an absolute game changer in the most literal sense of the phrase. Now, before we move on and talk about a bunch of Team Galactic's Pokemon, which we're obviously going to have to do so, we need to have a look at the Team Galactic support cards that really do give the context needed, because although these Team Galactic's Pokemon were good, they were made so much better by the support cards they had. Now, Cyrus's Conspiracy was the absolute linchpin of all of it. It was a supporter card, and when you played it, you searched your deck for a supporter card, a basic energy, and a trainer card that had Team Galactic's invention in its name. You showed them to your opponent, and you put them into your hand. Now, the important thing here was that you would do what was referred to as Cyrus chaining. So you would play Cyrus's Conspiracy, and you would search for a basic energy, a trainer card with Team Galactic's invention in its name, and another copy of Cyrus's Conspiracy. So you could do the same thing next turn. And there are some formats of the Pokemon trading card game where you just cannot afford to give up the draw that some supporters can give you. But in a format with cards like Uxie and Claydol, you absolutely could use your supporter for search along these lines, because you would just use Pokemon to draw. It was kind of ridiculous. So what were these Team Galactic's inventions? They were all ridiculous. Energy Gain you attached as a tool, and it reduced the cost of your attacks by 1 colorless energy, which means that Pokemon that came later, like Luxray for instance, turned into single energy attackers. So you could play a Cyrus's Conspiracy, grab a Lightning Energy and an Energy Gain, and oh look, now Luxray is attacking. It was ridiculous. Power Spray was arguably even more ridiculous, because if you had 3 or more Pokemon SP in play, you could play this on your opponent's turn, a very rare thing in the Pokemon TCG, and it would stop one of your opponent's Pokemon's Poke Powers. And, I mean, the classic example of this was Uxie. Your opponent plays Uxie, you Power Spray it, not only does your opponent not get to draw the cards, but now they've taken up a bench space with Uxie and it's on the bench so they can't play it next turn. They still bench Uxie, the benching still happens, they just don't get to actually use the poker power. And this would lead to mind games. You would literally try and bait a power spray. If you had one poker power that you really needed to use, you would try and bait your opponent. So if you really needed to get a Pokemon out of your prizes with Azalf, a lot of the time, you would literally play a Uxie, not because you actually needed to draw the cards, but because if you just played the Azalf, it might get power sprayed. The mind games were beautiful. Now, Poker Turn, we've already mentioned, it just let you pick up a Pokemon SP, and this was great for healing your Pokemon, but it was also great for Crobat G, because Crobat G, as we're going to see in a moment, had a poker power that when you benched it, you placed one damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon, and then you would Poker Turn and do it again and just keep dropping damage, and it was nuts. And then, of course, you'd be able to heal all of your Pokemon SP doing this. Oh, my lordy, it was amazing, ladies and gentlemen. It was amazing. The other one we had here was SP Radar. But that didn't actually come in this set. That came in later in Rising Rivals. I've mentioned it because it's important context for these SP decks. But it is important to note that it was a great card. Like I say, it was an item version of BB Search, but for Pokemon SP. But it's really important to note it didn't actually come out in this set. It came out a little bit later. So Crobat G, we've already mentioned Crobat G was nuts. It is worth pointing out that as well as the amazing poker power, it also had a retreat cost of 0 and a not terrible attack that poisoned the defending Pokemon and put 2 damage counters on them between turns. It is worth noting again, this card would come out slightly later, but we would eventually get SP energy. And the important thing about that was, it was a special energy that was one of any energy when attached to a Pokemon SP. So even though you might not be playing Psychic Energy, you might be playing this, so you would end up actually using attacks like Crobat G's, whereas you wouldn't in a non-SP deck. Now, Dialga G will go down as one of the very, very best of the SP Pokemon. Dialga G had the amazing attack Deafen. Again, that's just for an energy gain and a metal energy. Your opponent cannot play any trainer cards or stadium cards from his or her hand during your opponent's next turn. Nowadays, that would be items and stadiums. They could still play supporters, but they could not play any item cards. They could not play any stadium cards. Second Strike was fine, 50 damage, and if the defending Pokemon's already got 2 or more damage on, you do 70. Decent attack, but make no mistake about it, Dialga G was played for Deafen, and with Cyrus's Conspiracy and Energy Gain, this was an easy attack to get rolling on the first turn of the game. But then you had the Level X. The Level X had the Pokebody Time Crystal that just turned off Pokebodies. Like all Pokebodies. Any Pokebodies on any non-SP Pokemon, SP Pokemon were exempted, would all just be shut off. This was hideously disruptive, to the point a lot of SP decks would play a 1-1 Dialga G Level X line, not because they really wanted to play Dialga G, but because it was a 1-1 Pokemon line that you could use to turn off all Pokebodies. Although do remember, you could only level X when you were in the active, so you would have to level X and then get out the active. 4 energy was expensive, but again, energy gain would help. 80 damage, flip a coin till you get tails. For each head, you remove an energy card attached to the defending Pokemon and put it into the Lost Zone. So this would end up, sometimes you'd flip really well and get rid of loads of energy, but even when you didn't, you'd occasionally Lost Zone an energy, and that would be kind of fun. The other thing about Dialga G, of course, this was around when we still had that old special metal energy. And that old special metal energy would reduce damage done to you by attacks by 10. So what you would essentially do is, the aim here was to get 4 of them onto Dialga. And then you would just be sitting there just tanking over and over again, bearing in mind that you would also then have Poketurn as an emergency to completely heal you. I'm going to have to spoil the surprise a little bit, but later on we would have Garchomp C level X, whose Poke Power when you level X'd it was Healing Breath, removed all damage counters from each of your Pokemon SP, and yes, Poketurn could let you reuse that as well. And Dialga with Garchomp ended up being one of the very best decks in the game, and you could properly tank with Dialga. It was amazing. Now, Bronzong was also a very, very nice Pokemon G. Bronzong G. It had the Poke Power Galactic switch. Once during your turn, you may move an energy attached to one of your Pokemon SP to another, and then put 2 damage counters onto Bronzong G. But again, between Poketurn and Garchomp, that damage a lot of the time was irrelevant. The thing is, this was sneakily and often overlooked as the real key to Pokemon SP decks. Because, firstly, it let you just drop random attacks out of nowhere. Energy for the turn, energy gain, Galactic switch. Oh, look, now I've got free energy on my Pokemon out of nowhere. But also, you might not have the Pokemon you need, but you've got Bronzong. So what you do is you just whack the energy on Bronzong. And then at some point in the future, you would be able to move that energy from Bronzong to the Pokemon you want. It was frankly wonderful, and it really made SP decks more adaptable and much more difficult to actually play against. Now, Honchkrow G was another rather fun one. It had Honcho's command for no energy. Search your deck for 2 in any combination of stadium cards or trainer cards with Team Galactic's invention in their name and put him in your hand. Nice for setting up in the early game. And then 2 energy, 20 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon, 40 if they've already got damage on. Nice for finishing off bench Pokemon. Very much a tech attack, but still kind of cool. Now, a couple that we need to look at as a pair here are Skuntank and Toxicroak. These made their own deck, which did actually went and win the Junior World Championships, but was dismissed by a lot of older players as a kind of beginner's deck. Now, Skuntank had the Poke Power Poison structure. If you had a Stadium card in play, each active Pokemon, excluding Pokemon SP, are now poisoned. So you would just poison both active Pokemon, except you'd be a Pokemon SP, so you would just poison your opponent's Pokemon, which was a bit ridiculous. Note that it does not say Skuntank has to be your active Pokemon. Then you bring in Toxicroak, and what was kind of cool was it had a Pokeball that prevented all effective attacks other than damage, so that's special conditions and energy removal and all of that. And it's a 2 energy attack, so energy gain says hello. And 60 damage if the defending Pokemon is poisoned. The thing is, first, if you go second, you're allowed to do whatever you want. Well, get Skuntank, get Toxicroak, energy gain. Oh, look, I'm hitting for 60 and they're poisoned, and I'm basically set up. It was a very straightforward kind of deck, a simple kind of deck, although obviously more complicated versions of it were made, but it was a very cool pairing of 2 pretty gosh darn good Pokemon. Now, speaking of legendaries that had level X's, we should probably also talk about Palkia G level X and Palkia G. Palkia G for 2 energy did 20 damage and flicked to the bench, which was kind of cool. And for 3 energy did 50 damage plus 10 to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. But Palkia G level X was the star. I've already mentioned the Poke Power that basically said if your opponent had more than 3 bench Pokemon, they'd be lost zoning some of them. But then for 4 energy, you discarded 2 and did 80 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Like, I don't know, top of my head, a Claydol? Which would then mean your opponent couldn't draw their cards and set up. And this was a card that could absolutely frustrate your opponent. It was its own deck. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Now, Zangoose, weirdly enough, was quite a cool card here. Zangoose, for a single energy, you switch the defending Pokemon with one of your opponent's bench and did 20 damage to the new defending Pokemon. It was really nice for just trying to buy yourself a little bit of time. Although we also had a free energy attack that did 50 to the active and 10 to each of your opponent's bench that already had damage counters on it. Ampharos is one we've been waiting to talk about for a little while now. Our Ampharos deck is now complete. The Pokebody damage bind says that each Pokemon with any damage counters on it cannot use any Poke Powers. I know, that seems pretty disruptive. And that was the best thing about Ampharos. 2 energy, 30 damage. Head 60, tails 30 plus paralysis. Quite cool. 3 energy, 70 damage, and movement energy from Ampharos to one of your bench, so if you get KO'd you don't lose the energy. Again, kinda cool. But it really was the Pokebody here turning off your opponent's Poke Powers that was the star as far as Ampharos was concerned. Now, Blissey was a cool card that saw a bit of play here and there. It was really all about the Poke Power Nurse Call. Once during your turn, again, does not say you have to be active, you can discard a card from your hand to remove 2 damage counters from one of your Pokemon. Now, this didn't stack, you could only use 1 each turn, but this is a kind of thing that if your opponent was trying to 2-hit KO you, you could avoid some key KOs here. 1 energy, 20 damage, draw 2, got 6 cards in your hand, was also a pretty good emergency attack if you were just really struggling to set up. Now, Giratina is going to look familiar to newer players, because this was mirrored with another Psychic Pokemon more recently, but one of the Giratina we had, like I said, there were numerous, had the Poke Power Let Loose. You put Giratina from your hand to your bench, and each player shuffles his or her hand into his or her deck, and draws to 4 cards. The thing is, you could play this when your opponent had a large hand, and it would punish them. Or you could play this when your opponent wasn't set up yet, didn't have Claydol, etc., and this could stop them setting up. Or it could just give you a new hand. It was a really good Poke Power, and we did see it played by a bunch of people. And the final Pokemon I'm going to shout out here was Manectric, another free retreater, which was cool, but it had a lovely Pokebody, prevent all damage done to your bench Pokemon, other than Manectric. Though I'll tell you right now, an awful lot of people lost an awful lot of games because they forgot that Manectric did not prevent itself from being KO'd. And then Manectric went down and they lost the game. But it also had a really nice attack Power Wave that for a single energy did 30 damage to each Pokemon that had any Poke Powers. Now that was yours and your opponent, so you had to be very careful. But if your opponent was far more reliant on Poke Powers than you, this could be a really, really good spread attack. 2 energy, 40 damage, search for a lightning energy and attach it to one of your Pokemon was fine, but for me it was always the least out of the 3 things. But there were also a whole bunch of trainer cards in this set that we should probably take a look at. And you'll get that in a second. Because Looker's Investigation. Essentially what you did was you looked at your opponent's hand, and then you picked one of you to shuffle your hand into your deck and get a new hand of 5 cards. So either you get a new hand of 5, yay, draw power, etc., or your opponent does, but you know what your opponent's hand is because you get to look. So essentially, you look at your opponent's hand, and if they've got a good hand, you give them a new one hoping it's bad, and if they've got a bad hand, you get a new hand. Very cool card, and it was very interactive, which I appreciated. Memory Berry was a very cool card. What Memory Berry did was it let you use the attacks of your previous evolutions, and the best use for this really was Flygon level X, copying Trapinch's Sand Tomb. Trapinch had the attack Sand Tomb, single energy, 10 damage, stops your opponent retreating. But then Flygon level X's Pokebody, as long as Flygon was your active, you discarded the top card of your opponent's deck between turns. After yours, after theirs, after yours, etc. So what you would do is you would get Flygon level X up, attach a Memory Berry, drag something into the active that your opponent did not want in the active, and then you would basically sit there just using Sand Tomb over and over again. The low damage really helped because you just would not KO them, and while you weren't KOing them and they weren't able to get out the active, you would just be milling their deck over and over again. Yeah, that was fun, ladies and gentlemen. That was fun. Galactic HQ was another Team Galactic's card, and I'll be honest with you, it wasn't the best of them. But it did put 2 damage counters on any Pokemon that got evolved. Whenever you evolved a Pokemon, you put 2 damage counters on them. Bearing in mind, the whole point of SP Pokemon is that they are basics, this was a card that helped him out very nicely. Pokemon Rescue was a fun one. It was just an item card that let you search your discard pile for a Pokemon, show it to your opponent, and put it into your hand. But of course, you had decks like Gyarados that really needed to have free Magikarp in the discard pile at all times, so it really was nice to have nice ways to recover those Magikarp, given that you really needed to recover the Magikarp, or else you couldn't have a Gyarados and things would go pretty wrong. Well, this did that very nicely indeed. And the final trainer card I'm going to call out here was Level Max. Now, Level Max, you flip a coin. If heads, you search your deck for a Pokemon level X that levels up from one of your Pokemon and put it onto that Pokemon. Yeah. Now, bearing in mind, I told you just a couple of minutes ago that you had to level X in the active. You could only put the level X on when it was in the active. This broke that rule. This allowed you, if you could flip a coin, to not only level X quicker, but also level X without having to get into and out of the active. Because it gave you such of an advantage when you flipped heads, it did see a bunch of play, even though you had to flip heads. Now, in terms of the best decks from Platinum, it's a bit of a weird one. We had a ridiculous amount of cards like Broken Time Space, like Crobat, that made their way into so many decks it was silly. But in terms of new decks, this was not necessarily the best set for it. But there were a few which I do think we can count as proper Platinum decks, although they all needed a little bit more help, shall we say. But Skuntank and Toxicroak did combine to make Crowned Tiger, the 2009 Junior Champion deck, played by Tsubasa Nakamura. And this really was a deck built around Toxicroak and Skuntank, like I showed you before. It did play two of those Honchkrow to help you get set up in the early game, but also to do damage, because remember, you'd be poisoning them and all of that. They'd retreat to the bench, Honchkrow could finish them off. We did see Bronzong here to move your energy around, as you might expect, and we did see a 1-1 Dialga G level X line, as you might expect. The other thing that was interesting here is we did play a 2-2 Luxray GL level X line, mostly for the Poké Power that could drag a Pokemon from the bench into the active, though the deck played a bunch of lightning energy, so you absolutely could attack with it. It was kind of a standard SP deck that didn't play the standard SP Pokemon. It used your Luxray, but really it was all about using Skuntank and Toxicroak to hit for pretty nice damage very, very quickly indeed. Now, we've finally finished our Ampharos deck, so we need to have a quick chat about that here, because Ampharos was awesome. Now, remember, it really was an Abomasnow Ampharos deck. You had the Abomasnow from Stormfront that for 2 energy did 20 damage to each of your opponent's non-grass, non-water bench Pokemon, which was awesome. Then you had the Ampharos from Secret Wonders, that every time your opponent played a supporter card, you put 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon. So you've got lots of good spreading going on there. And then you've got Damage Bind, and this was really what Platinum added to the equation, because then all of your opponent's Pokemon would have damage counters on, and when they had damage counters on, they couldn't use any Poké Powers. And that was really the hook of the deck. That was how the deck worked, and I tell you what, it was a very, very fun deck indeed. We liked it, frankly, ladies and gentlemen. We liked it. And the final deck I think we can really say was a proper job Platinum deck. Might have been the best of them. In fact, I think it almost certainly was. It was what is often referred to as Palkia Lock. And I do need to give shout-outs to the lovely Jason Klaczynski's blog, which goes through a bunch of old decks, and PTCG Archive, that are 2 of the sites I use when trolling for old deck lists. They are, well, quite frankly, pretty gosh darned good websites. Now, Palkia Lock really was a Palkia level X deck that did rely on Palkia level X. That was your attacker. We had those 3 nice attacks. You could do 20 damage and flick to your bench, or you could do 50 and spread, or you could do 80 to one of your opponent's bench. But the real key here with Palkia Lock was you were turning off Poké Powers. You were going for the lock, but it wasn't a permanent lock like you saw with Ampharos. It was an as and when lock. So of course you would be playing Power Spray here, You played it when your opponent tried to use a Poker Power, but you would also use Mesprit. That's the one from Legends Awakened, that when you play it from your hand to your bench, you turned off your opponent's Poker Powers for a turn. And then, of course, when you haven't been able to bench a Mesprit and your opponent does have Poker Powers turned on, that is when you use your Power Spray. So in theory here, what you're essentially doing is locking them with Mesprit, and then when you can't get a Mesprit, you're still going to Power Spray them, and it's going to be kind of hilarious. For you, not for them. Remembering, of course, that you had a Poker Power which stopped your opponent having more than 3 bench Pokemon, and you had the Hydro Shot ability which just happened to do the exact amount of damage you needed in order to take out a bench Claydol. And the goal here was really rather simple. Ability lock them or Poker Power lock them while you set up, take out their Claydol, and then just kind of sit there and attack till you win. Really was a very good deck and a lot of fun if you were playing with it, less so if you were playing against it. I know that this look at Platinum has taken, well, over 35 minutes already. It's taken longer than we usually do for these history videos, but the fact of the matter is, Platinum was a set that absolutely transformed the game. Bringing in SP Pokemon, bringing in the Lost Zone, bringing in Broken Time Space and everything else was nuts. SP Pokemon were not as good as they would be when Platinum came out. They had a few of the tricks, but they didn't have the best Pokemon. Over the next couple sets, my word, they would get them. And it is worth pointing out that we've still got at least 2 or 3 sets in a row that should be phenomenal and absolutely should be counted, or were phenomenal, but absolutely should be counted in our conversations when we look at the very best Pokemon decks and sets ever. So there we go. That was Platinum. As always, I want to know your memories of it, if you have any, if you were playing back then. And I'd like to know your thoughts on it if you weren't playing then and you're seeing these cards now. Go nuts in the comment section, but be nice! And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.